In the distant reaches of the galaxy, beyond the territories of known civilizations, the Vornax Dominion was preparing for what they believed would be a routine conquest. The Dominion, an empire of colossal warships and cold, calculating minds, had long ruled the stars with an iron fist. Their victory over countless species had been swift, their dominance undeniable. But now, they had set their eyes on a new world, humanity's home system, Sol. It was a backwater, primitive sector. The humans, a species still confined to their own tiny corner of the galaxy, had never posed any real threat. The Vornax fleet was vast, a swirling array of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and destroyers, each one bristling with advanced weaponry capable of eradicating entire planets. They had already wiped out several lesser species in their expansion, and the humans were no exception. Their scouts had reported a small fleet of human ships stationed at the edge of the system, a pitiful collection of outdated cruisers and freighters. To the Vornax, it seemed like nothing more than a token defense, a few dozen ships that would fall before their might. Commander Rix, a towering figure among the Vornax, stood on the command deck of the flagship Sovereign. His eyes narrowed as he studied the star map before him. His lips curled into a cruel smile. "They think they can stop us," he muttered, his voice low and filled with disdain. "How amusing. They are nothing." Beside him, his tactical officer, Talus, shifted uneasily. "There is a report from the scout ships, Commander. The humans appear to be, how should I put it, preparing for something. Their ships are moving." "Moving?" Rick scoffed, turning away from the holographic display. "Do they honestly believe they can resist us? Send a message to the fleet. Prepare to engage at full speed. The humans will bow before our might." The Vornax had no reason to doubt their superiority. Their warships were massive, towering, heavily armored monsters capable of withstanding anything the humans might throw at them. Their weapons could obliterate entire fleets with a single strike. The idea that a ragtag group of human ships could even make a dent in their force was laughable. Rix had seen human ships before, primitive things, outmatched by anything the Vornax used. He'd seen their fragile hulls, their outdated weapons, their crude technology. But the humans were resourceful, he'd heard, and stubborn. That, at least, was something to be respected. But respect would not save them. "Are we certain about the composition of the fleet?" Rix asked. He turned back to face Talus, his eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Yes, Commander. The reports indicate that it's a small fleet, mostly old models. They have a few modern warships, but they're still outclassed by anything in our arsenal." Talus confirmed, voice steady. "Good," Rick said, turning to face the viewport. "We'll show them what happens to those who dare defy the Vornax Dominion." The massive fleet surged forward into the depths of the Sol system, like a storm bearing down on an unsuspecting world. The human fleet, a motley group of ships that had once been nothing more than freighters, cruisers, and relics of an older age, sat at the edge of the system, awaiting their fate. Their command ship, the Indomitable, a symbol of human tenacity, was ready for battle. But the humans had little idea what they were about to face. Admiral Ethan Matthews stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his face etched with quiet resolve. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. His fleet was small, a handful of ships compared to the Vornax juggernaut. Yet he knew something the Vornax didn't. They were wrong. The humans were not weak. Not anymore. The stars of the Sol system stretched out before the human fleet, a dark sea of glittering pinpricks. The Indomitable and its accompanying ships hovered near the outer rim of the system, their sensors reaching out into the vastness, tracking the incoming storm. It was only a matter of time before the Vornax arrived. Admiral Ethan Matthews stood at the command center, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the data feeds. His mind was sharp, his focus unbroken. He knew this would be humanity's moment to prove itself, not just to the Vornax, but to the entire galaxy. If they couldn't hold the line here, everything would be lost. Status report. Matthews barked, turning to his tactical officer, Commander Olivia Hayes. "We've got a full fleet of Vornax warships approaching, Admiral," Hayes replied, her fingers dancing across the console. "From the data we intercepted, it's their primary force, at least 50 ships, including their flagship Sovereign. They've got overwhelming numbers." Matthews took a breath, forcing his nerves to steady. The Vornax had underestimated them. He'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. He trusted his crew, and he trusted the technology that had been secretly developed in humanity's darkest hours. It wasn't much compared to the Vornax fleet, but it was enough. "Deploy the decoys," he ordered, his voice cold and precise. "Decoys deploying," Hayes confirmed. Across the human fleet, dozens of holographic projections flickered to life. False ships, false signals designed to confuse and mislead. The Vornax might have their advanced weaponry, but their intelligence and tracking systems were still vulnerable to basic deception. Matthews wasn't about to fight them head-on. Not yet. Meanwhile, aboard the Sovereign, Commander Rix was growing impatient. His fleet was now within weapons range, and his officers were making final adjustments to their targeting systems. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the human fleet, still holding formation at the edge of the system. "Fire," he commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. The first volley of energy blasts from the Vornax fleet ripped through space, their destructive power enough to obliterate entire fleets with ease. But as the beams shot toward the human position, something unexpected happened. The human ships, small, fragile-looking ships, didn't scatter or retreat. Instead, they vanished. Where did they go? Rix barked, his eyes flicking from one sensor screen to the next. The human ships had somehow disappeared from his targeting systems. "Impossible, sir," Talus, his tactical officer, said, her voice betraying a hint of disbelief. "The human ships are not using conventional stealth technology. Their signatures are fluctuating. It's like they're ghosts," Rix finished, frustration creeping into his voice. "Fine. They want to play tricks. We'll burn them out." He ordered his fleet to adjust fire, but the human ships remained elusive, dancing through the debris fields and asteroids, their movements synchronized in a way that made no sense to the Vornax. On the Indomitable, Matthews stood with his arms crossed, watching the battle unfold on the large display screen. He didn't react, didn't flinch. His tactics were being executed perfectly. "Commander Hayes, initiate Phase 2, Matthews said quietly. Hayes looked at him, eyes wide. "Are you sure, sir? It's risky. If it doesn't work." "It will work," Matthews cut her off. "Phase 2, now." The signal went out to the fleet, and in an instant, everything changed. Human ships, seemingly scattered across the system, suddenly converged in a coordinated, impossible formation, almost as though they had been in one place all along. At the same time, a faint hum filled the air as the Indomitable activated its quantum interference drives. The Vornax ships, unable to account for the sudden movement and distorted signals, struggled to adjust their targeting systems. Human vessels appeared in multiple locations at once, then vanished again, their light-bending technology playing tricks on the Vornax sensors. The Sovereign fired again, but this time, the beams missed entirely, striking only empty space. Rick snarled in frustration. "What is happening?" He growled. "Why are they evading us?" "Sir, their ships are using some kind of advanced displacement field," Talus reported, now visibly rattled. "They're warping light and space around them. We can't get a lock on their positions." The Vornax fleet, once so sure of their dominance, was now flailing, their attacks lost in a sea of confusion. Matthew's fleet had become a phantom, a shifting maze of shadows and echoes. The tiny human ships were nowhere and everywhere, at once. "Give the order," Matthews said, his voice unwavering. "Phase 3, engage." The Indomitable fired its first salvo, a burst of high-intensity plasma bolts that tore through the dark void, striking the lead Vornax destroyer with pinpoint precision. The explosion was deafening, and the ship began to break apart in a fiery bloom. Then came another, and another. Each shot was surgically accurate, timed to perfection, as human vessels picked off their enemies one by one. Phase 3, Matthews muttered, as the Vornax fleet scrambled in chaos. And they said we were weak. As the first Vornax warship exploded in the void, a new reality began to set in. Humanity wasn't here to die. They were here to fight. And the Vornax had no idea what they were up against. The battle raged on as the human fleet, once thought to be nothing more than a fleeting distraction, now struck with terrifying precision. The Vornax fleet, despite its overwhelming size, was falling into disarray. The Indomitable and its sister ships, though outnumbered, seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, cutting through the Vornax lines with surgical strikes that left chaos in their wake. Admiral Matthews watched the unfolding disaster from the bridge of the Indomitable. His crew, calm and focused, carried out their orders without hesitation. The Sovereign, the Vornax flagship, was still imposing on the far side of the battlefield, but Matthews had no intention of giving it a clear shot. His strategy was simple: keep them off balance, keep them guessing, and make them question everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. "Admiral, the Vornax have reformed their lines," Commander Hayes said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "They're preparing a full assault, no more distractions. They'll hit us with everything they've got." Matthews glanced at the tactical display, seeing the Vornax ships reorganizing themselves into a tighter formation. The initial confusion had begun to clear, and now they were coming for him. But Matthews knew they were already too late. They had underestimated the human fleet's potential, and now they were walking into a trap. Phase 4, Commander. It's time. Hayes hesitated only for a moment before relaying the order. A soft hum filled the air as the quantum interference drives on the Indomitable powered up, causing the ship to briefly flicker in and out of visibility. Matthews had seen this maneuver work before during training exercises, but this was real combat. It was dangerous, but necessary. The Vornax fleet, now re-engaged, charged forward, their massive warships firing on the scattered human ships. The energy blasts whizzed by, missing their marks as the Indomitable blinked in and out of existence. It was like trying to hit a shadow in the dark. "Now," Matthews barked, his eyes narrowing. As the human fleet coalesced into a single, unified strike force, the Vornax warships came into range. The humans opened fire. The Indomitable and its sister ships unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma bolts, energy missiles, and gravity shift projectiles. The plasma bolts streaked through space, leaving trails of ionized particles in their wake as they tore into the Vornax ships. One destroyer was obliterated in the first salvo, its shields unable to react in time to the overwhelming firepower. The explosion sent shockwaves rippling through space, throwing Vornax vessels off course. "Direct hits," Hayes reported, her voice almost disbelieving. "They're falling back. They're actually falling back, Admiral." Matthews allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction, but he knew better than to get complacent. The Vornax had the strength of numbers, and they would adapt. It was only a matter of time before they adjusted to the humans' unpredictable tactics. As if on cue, the Vornax flagship Sovereign surged forward, its massive weaponry charging up. Matthews knew what was coming. The Vornax would try to break the human lines with sheer firepower, a final push to crush their resistance. "Commander, get us out of here now," Matthews commanded. "Reposition to the left flank, immediately." The Indomitable executed a sharp turn, its engines roaring as the ship veered left, narrowly avoiding a beam of raw energy from the Sovereign. The energy beam struck one of the decoy ships, causing it to disintegrate in a burst of light. It was a diversion, but Matthews knew the Vornax were hungry for more. They weren't thinking strategically. They were desperate, trying to force the human fleet into submission. "We've drawn their attention," Matthews said. "Now we need to give them a reason to think twice." He tapped a button on his command chair, and a series of cloaked drone fighters launched from the Indomitable. These small, agile ships were designed for one purpose: to sow chaos and confusion within enemy ranks. As the drones scattered into the Vornax fleet, Matthews watched the tactical display closely. The drones emitted fake signals, mimicking the human ship's quantum signatures, forcing the Vornax to waste firepower on targets that weren't there. The Sovereign and its fleet began firing in all directions, the Vornax desperately trying to target the elusive drones, but the damage was already done. Their weapons were being spent on ghosts while the human fleet closed in for the real kill. Then came the moment Matthews had been waiting for. The Indomitable reappeared from its cloak, its weapons primed and ready. With one final push, the human fleet focused all their fire on the Vornax flagship, the Sovereign. The first salvo of plasma strikes hit the Vornax shields with devastating force, overwhelming the Sovereign's defenses in seconds. The human ships worked together in perfect harmony, coordinating their fire and exploiting every weakness in the Vornax armor. "Direct hit," Hayes said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Their shield systems are failing." Matthews didn't allow himself to feel triumph yet. He knew the fight wasn't over. But the Vornax, once confident of their invincibility, were beginning to crack. They were no longer laughing. "Keep the pressure on," Matthews said, his voice grim but resolute. "We've just shown them what it means to underestimate humanity. Now, let's make sure they never forget it." In the cold void of space, the balance had shifted. The tide of the battle was no longer in favor of the Vornax. And humanity, once thought of as weak and insignificant, was proving they had a far different destiny in the stars. The Vornax fleet, once confident in their overwhelming power, was now teetering on the edge of panic. Their flagship, the Sovereign, was buckling under a relentless barrage of human fire. Plasma bursts and anti-shield missiles collided with its outer hull, creating massive cracks in its reinforced armor. Each strike brought the mighty vessel closer to collapse. The Vornax commanders, who had assumed the human fleet would crumble before their might, were now scrambling to salvage their campaign. Commander Rix stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, fists clenched in frustration as he watched his fleet falter. He had been in countless battles, his reputation built on crushing inferior species with ruthless efficiency, and yet here he was, outmaneuvered, outgunned, and on the verge of defeat. His tactical officer, Talus, was desperately trying to maintain control of the battle, but the data was clear. The humans were no longer simply evading destruction. They were actively dismantling the Vornax fleet. "Status report," Rix demanded, his voice strained. "The Sovereign's shield integrity is down to 42%, Talus replied, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We've lost contact with the forward battalions. The human ships are using some kind of advanced field technology, something we've never seen before. They keep blinking in and out of our sensors, almost like they're facing through space." Rix's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. We've analyzed their technology. Their ships are primitive, nothing more than old human designs with a few upgrades. This is beyond their capabilities." But as the Sovereign shuddered under another direct hit, Rix began to question everything he knew. No species, not even the highly resourceful humans, should have been able to employ such advanced technology without being detected. What if the humans had been hiding something more dangerous than anyone had realized? "Sir," Talus interrupted, her voice laced with unease. "I'm receiving a new communication signal. It's encrypted from the human flagship." Rix's gaze hardened. "Put it through." A moment later, the cold, clipped voice of Admiral Ethan Matthews filled the bridge. "Commander Rix, I trust you're enjoying the show. I thought you might like to know a few things about humanity's little secret." Rix felt a chill run down his spine. The human admiral's calm tone only made the situation more unnerving. Matthews continued, You see, we're not just using advanced stealth fields and quantum displacement drives to make our ships disappear. That's just the beginning. The technology you're facing, this ability to predict your every move, to counter your strikes before you even launch them, it's not human ingenuity alone. It's based on something we discovered, something much older. We call it the Asterisk Archetype Network. Archetype. Rix echoed, his voice filled with confusion. What nonsense are you? Not nonsense, Matthews interrupted, his tone cutting through the static of space. It's the neural imprint of a long-dead race, one that had knowledge far beyond anything your Dominion has ever encountered. And we, the humans, were the ones who unlocked it. What you're seeing, Commander, is a glimpse into that power. It's in our ships, it's in our weapons, and most importantly, it's in our minds. Rix's grip on the command chair tightened. He had heard rumors of ancient civilizations, long-extinct species whose knowledge had been lost to the stars. But the humans, with their supposed primitive tech, had somehow tapped into this forgotten knowledge. Impossible, he muttered, as his mind raced to piece together the enormity of the situation. The Vornax had encountered many species with strange technologies, some capable of surprising feats, but nothing like this, nothing that could predict enemy movements with such eerie precision. And those quantum displacement drives, they weren't just technology. They were something more, something far more dangerous than anything the Vornax had ever faced. I know this is difficult to comprehend, Commander, Matthews continued, his voice now laced with the quiet confidence of a man who knew he had already won. But we're just getting started. The Archetype Network is growing. Every battle, every encounter, we unlock more of it. Your fleet is simply the first to experience what humanity can do when we stop being afraid of the unknown. And you, Commander, are the first to see what happens when you underestimate us. The transmission cut off, leaving Rix standing in stunned silence. The human admiral's words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, Rix felt doubt creeping into his calculations. His once clear belief in the Vornax's superiority was crumbling before him. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting with knowledge that could reshape the galaxy. We've made a grave mistake, Rix whispered, turning to Talis. All of this, every calculation, every victory. We've been wrong. The bridge was quiet for a moment, the hum of the damaged systems and the distant sound of the battle outside filling the air. Then, Talis spoke, her voice unsteady. What do we do now, Commander? Rix's mind raced, the pieces finally falling into place. The Vornax had never faced anything like this. If the humans had access to knowledge from an ancient civilization, if their ability to predict and counter every move was real, then the battle was no longer a simple matter of strength. The humans had the upper hand. We retreat, Rix said, his voice colder than it had ever been. And we do it quickly. But as he gave the order to pull back, Rix knew deep down that it wasn't just a retreat from this battle. It was a retreat from the very idea of invincibility. The humans had just shown the Vornax something far more dangerous than weapons. They had shown them the future. The Sovereign limped away from the battlefield, its once mighty hull battered and scorched, its systems strained to the brink. Commander Rix stood motionless at the command chair, staring out into the void. His mind was a storm of disbelief, anger, and dread. The Vornax had never retreated from a fight before, especially not against a species so clearly inferior. Yet, here they were, pulling back after a single engagement with humanity. Re-establish communications with the fleet, Rix ordered sharply, his voice betraying none of the turmoil he felt. I want all ships to fall back to the edge of the system. We need to regroup and reassess. Talis, still recovering from the shock of their crushing defeat, tapped furiously at her console. Yes, sir. Transmitting orders now. But the fleet's already in disarray. Some of the ships are still engaging the humans in scattered pockets. They're not following orders. Get them to follow orders, Rix growled. He turned toward the large viewport, where the distant stars flickered as his flagship moved through the darkness. He was aware, as were all aboard the Sovereign, that the retreat was not a retreat. It was an admission of defeat. For the first time in their history, the Vornax had been outsmarted. Admiral Matthews had done more than just show humanity's ability to fight back. He had exposed the core of the Vornax's weakness, their arrogance. Their unshakable belief in their superiority had clouded their judgment, making them blind to the true potential of their enemies. Meanwhile, across the battlefront, the human fleet did not relent. The Indomitable led its forces with a grim resolve, continuing to engage Vornax ships that strayed too far from the retreating main fleet. The Indomitable's shields flickered as they absorbed a few stray energy blasts, but the human vessels, small as they were, fought with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Each shot was calculated, each movement deliberate, as they pressed the advantage. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Matthews watched the retreating Vornax ships with a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. He knew they were dangerous. Cornered animals were always the most dangerous. But they had taken a blow that would take a long time to recover from. "Commander Hayes," Matthews said, his voice even but with a note of weariness. "Prepare for a pursuit. We can't let them regroup too quickly." "Understood, sir," Hayes replied, her fingers already moving across the console. "But we need to be careful. If we push too hard, we risk falling into another trap. These creatures are vicious when they're desperate." Matthews nodded. "I know. But we have something they don't. Time. And they know it." It wasn't just the Vornax ships that were retreating. It was the illusion of invincibility that had been shattered. Matthews could see it in the brief flicker of hesitation on their faces when they glanced at the human fleet. The Vornax had been prepared for one thing: to crush an enemy that was supposed to be weak, insignificant, primitive. What they had encountered instead was something entirely unexpected. A species that had not only adapted but had found a way to fight back in a way that completely defied their understanding. "We need to know more about this archetype network," Matthews murmured to himself. The human fleet had only begun to tap into the mysterious technology that had given them an edge in this battle, and Matthews knew they couldn't rely on it forever. It was too new, too volatile. But it was their only chance to fight back against the Vornax. "We'll gather intel on it," Hayes said, as though reading his thoughts. "But I have to be honest, Admiral. We don't fully understand how it works. It's not like anything we've ever seen before. It's like tapping into a collective consciousness, a network of knowledge. We don't even know how it's possible." Matthews turned his gaze to the view of the retreating Vornax ships. They were starting to pull farther back into the outer reaches of the system. But he wasn't fooled. They weren't just running. They were regrouping. And when they came back, they'd be even more dangerous. "We'll figure it out," Matthews said, his tone resolute. "And we'll use it to our advantage. Humanity has been underestimated for far too long. Let's make sure the galaxy knows that." Back on the Sovereign, Rix clenched his fists as he watched the distance between his fleet and the human ships widen. His mind churned with frustration and a seething desire for retribution. The Indomitable's victory was no fluke. It had been carefully planned, meticulously executed. The humans had adapted, learned, and struck when the Vornax least expected it. The commander's mind raced as he began formulating a new strategy, one that would put the humans back in their place. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The Vornax were no longer facing a primitive species they could crush with ease. They were facing something far more dangerous, a species that had just proven they could outthink, outfight, and outblast them. "Prepare to recalibrate our approach," Rix finally said, his voice cold and filled with determination. "The Sovereign will not fall today. We will finish this, and we will destroy them." But even as he spoke, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on him. The humans had shown him a terrifying truth. Their strength was not in their numbers, their size, or their weaponry. It was in their minds. And Rix knew, deep down, that if the Vornax didn't adapt quickly, they would be the ones who were destroyed. The Vornax had regrouped, but their retreat was far from an orderly withdrawal. In the deep recesses of their fleet, dissension began to fester. Commander Rix had ordered a full retreat to the outskirts of the system, but even as his ships moved into formation, a sense of unease permeated the ranks. The once unshakable belief in their supremacy was now cracked, and that crack had started to spread. Rix sat in his quarters aboard the Sovereign, staring out into the endless dark of space. The stars seemed distant, almost mocking him. He had led the Vornax to countless victories, had watched countless lesser species break beneath their might. But now it felt different. The human fleet, small, fragile, and seemingly insignificant, had done what none of his enemies had managed to do before. They had made the Vornax retreat. A knock at the door broke his reverie. Without waiting for permission, Talus entered, her expression grim. She had always been his most trusted officer, and now she brought with her news that would only deepen the growing tension. "Commander," she began, her voice low, "we've intercepted human communications. They're not just regrouping. They're preparing for another offensive." Rix turned slowly to face her. "An offensive? They're already weak. Their ships are outnumbered. Why would they? They've been scavenging our wreckage," Talus continued, her voice tight with disbelief. "Our lost ships, the ones we left behind, have been stripped down and repurposed. The humans are using our technology against us, Commander. They're adapting faster than we ever expected." Rix's chest tightened, a cold knot forming deep in his stomach. The Vornax had been ruthless in their conquests, stripping whole planets of their resources and technology. They had never imagined that another species, especially one as primitive as humanity, could turn their tactics against them so quickly. To the Vornax, this was unthinkable. They had always been the hunters, the predators. They did not adapt. They conquered. "Damn it," Rix muttered under his breath. He slammed a fist onto the table, causing the small objects on his desk to shake. "We underestimated them, and now they've turned our own technology into a weapon." Talus stepped forward, her expression softening. "They're not just using our technology, sir. They've also been using it to study us, our strategies, our tactics. I think they're learning how we think." The realization hit Rix like a blow to the chest. The humans weren't just copying Vornax tech. They were copying their methods. And worse, they were using that knowledge to predict and counter every move the Vornax made. The psychological advantage was slipping away, and the once unassailable Vornax military might now felt like an echo of something that had already been defeated. "Have the fleet commanders been briefed?" Rix asked, his voice dangerously calm. Talus hesitated. "Not yet, sir. There's a growing sense of panic among the lower ranks. Some are already calling for a full retreat to the outer regions of the galaxy. They don't think we can win this anymore." Rix's jaw tightened. "I didn't become a commander by retreating. I'll not allow fear to tear us apart. No, we need to hold the line. We can't afford to let them know we're faltering." He turned to the strategic map on the wall, the holographic display flickering with data streams and fleet formations. In his mind, the pieces were falling into place. But the truth was, there was no certainty. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had broken the illusion of invincibility that the Vornax had built for centuries. And now, Rix wasn't sure if they could recover it. "Initiate Phase 3 of the counteroffensive," Rix ordered, his voice low but firm. "Tell the fleet commanders to prepare for a final push. We'll show them what happens when they provoke the Vornax. Once we've broken their front, we'll eliminate the Indomitable. They'll fall like all the others." Talus gave a brief nod, but her hesitation lingered. "And if the humans outsmart us again?" Rix didn't answer immediately. He stared at the stars beyond the viewport, the familiar coldness in his veins mingling with a creeping fear. He had always relied on his superiority, his knowledge of tactics, his ability to anticipate his enemy's every move. But against the humans, those advantages no longer seemed like guarantees. He wasn't sure anymore if they would be enough. The only way we win is by showing them we're still stronger, Rix finally said, voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. We press on. We destroy their fleet. We end this. Meanwhile, in the heart of the human fleet, Admiral Matthews stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the Vornax forces retreat into the blackness of space. The fight was far from over, but the battle they had won was a sign, a beacon to the galaxy that humanity had a place among the stars. We've got one shot at this, Matthews said quietly, turning to Hayes. If we can keep the pressure on, we can finish this fight once and for all. But the Vornax will come back with everything they've got. Hayes nodded, her face set in grim determination. Then let's make sure they know what happens when they push humanity too far. Matthews turned back to the stars, the hum of his ship and the whir of the machinery at his back, grounding him in the present. The Vornax had learned something critical, something that was now the most dangerous knowledge in the galaxy. Humanity would never go down without a fight. And the Vornax had just made a deadly mistake by assuming otherwise. The quiet after the battle had a weight to it. It wasn't the usual calm that followed a victory, where celebrations would break out across the fleet. No, this was something else, something more dangerous. Humanity had shown the Vornax their teeth, and the enemy wasn't backing down. The Vornax were regrouping, licking their wounds, but Matthews knew that the worst was yet to come. The Vornax didn't just lose, they revenged. Admiral Matthews stood at the heart of the Indomitable's command deck, staring out into the depths of space. The stars were distant pinpricks of light against the black velvet of the void. His hands were clasped behind his back as he processed the tactical data flooding in. The Vornax had retreated into deep space, but the scanners were picking up a new pattern, a massive buildup of energy, as if they were preparing something catastrophic. Commander Hayes, Matthews called, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. What's the status on their movements? Hayes, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her console, didn't need to look up to know what he meant. They're massing their fleet at the edge of the system. I'm tracking several hundred warships. Their formation suggests they're preparing for a full-scale assault. Matthews felt the tension in the air tighten. A direct attack wasn't unexpected. What was unexpected, however, was the signal they'd intercepted from a Vornax warship. It had come in fragmented, but the message was clear. Do not engage. They will destroy you. For a moment, Matthews allowed himself to feel the weight of that warning. The Vornax, those ruthless, calculating conquerors, were afraid. Why are they afraid? Matthews muttered to himself. Sir, Hayes asked, stepping closer. Matthews shook his head. Nothing. I've been reading their tactics all wrong. The Sovereign's retreat wasn't just about saving face, it was about buying time. And now they're getting ready to unleash something worse than we've seen so far. What are you suggesting? Hayes asked, her voice laced with concern. I think, Matthews said slowly, the Vornax have more to lose than we thought. They're not just coming after us, they're coming after everything. He tapped a few keys on the console, pulling up a series of encrypted communications that had come through from their deep space reconnaissance probes. They were still piecing the puzzle together, but one fact stood out. The Vornax weren't merely rebuilding their forces. They were activating a series of ancient devices hidden in the depths of their fleet. Devices that, according to their schematics, could rip through entire star systems. It's not just a weapon, Matthews said, his voice tight with realization. They're planning to use a supernova triggering device, a weapon capable of collapsing a star and sending shockwaves through the entire system. They want to destroy us, yes, but more than that, they want to make sure we never rise again. The room fell silent as the crew absorbed the magnitude of the threat. This wasn't a typical military confrontation. The Vornax were resorting to cosmic warfare, something that could obliterate entire star systems and devastate any chance of humanity ever establishing itself as a power in the galaxy. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of humankind. Can we stop it? Hayes asked, her voice filled with an underlying fear. Matthews hesitated. The plan they'd devised had been bold, aggressive, but even he wasn't sure it would work. The Vornax had the advantage now, especially if they were willing to use weapons of that magnitude. "We're going to need to hit them hard, before they can fire that weapon," Matthews said, his voice a hard edge of resolve. "This can't be a fight of attrition. If we let them build up any more momentum, they'll wipe us out before we have a chance to retaliate." He turned to his tactical officer. "Bring up the latest fleet positioning. We're going in. I want every available ship in position, and I want them now." "We're engaging that fleet?" Hayes asked incredulously. "We're outnumbered 5-1. Matthews' eyes narrowed as he watched the tactical map. "We don't have a choice. If we don't strike now, we won't have a chance to strike later. Those devices, they'll annihilate everything in their path." He leaned in close to the screen, his fingers hovering over the map. The Vornax fleet was slowly advancing, and Matthews knew the clock was ticking. If they didn't take action now, humanity would be gone. "We'll hit them in their blind spot," Matthews said with sudden clarity. "Their central command, the Sovereign, it's the heart of their fleet. We cripple it, and we cripple them." He glanced at Hayes, who nodded. "Understood. I'll inform the fleet. We'll be ready to launch within the hour." Matthews looked out at the dark expanse of space once more, the distant Vornax fleet advancing like a storm. The enemy was coming, and they weren't going to stop until they wiped humanity out. But Matthews knew one thing. The Vornax had underestimated humanity once. They would not make that mistake again. "We fight now, or we die," Matthews said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "And I'm not ready to let humanity fall." He turned and walked toward the bridge exit, his mind already calculating their next move. The Vornax might have a weapon capable of destroying stars, but humanity's weapon was its will to survive. And that would be enough. The human fleet, now fully assembled, drifted in the blackness of space like a dagger poised to strike. Every ship was in position, every crew member steeled for the inevitable battle. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Matthews stood in front of the massive holographic display, eyes locked on the advancing Vornax fleet. The battle to come would decide everything. The survival of humanity, or its destruction. The Vornax had amassed an overwhelming force, but Matthews wasn't intimidated. The Vornax were predators, and humans were proving they could outthink them. It had come to this moment, one final confrontation, where either humanity would push the invaders back or become a footnote in galactic history. Matthews knew that if they didn't strike decisively, the Vornax would execute their plan to collapse the star at the heart of the system, and the consequences would be catastrophic. "Admiral," Hayes called from her station, her voice tight with urgency. "We've confirmed the Vornax are activating the supernova device. They're preparing to detonate the core at any moment." Matthews' jaw tightened. He knew time was running out. "Lock onto their flagship," Matthews ordered, his voice icy. "Target the Sovereign first. The rest of their fleet can't function without it. We have one chance at this. One." The crew moved with purpose, fingers flying over consoles, while the hum of energy in the Indomitable seemed to grow louder. The flagship of the Vornax, the Sovereign, loomed on the display, its massive form surrounded by a protective fleet of warships, their weapons primed and ready. But Matthews wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The humans had shown the Vornax that they could learn, adapt, and strike with deadly precision. Today, they would show the Vornax something else, the sheer ferocity of humanity's resolve. "Ready all weapons," Matthews said, his voice low but filled with unshakable determination. "On my mark, we hit them with everything we've got. All ships, focus fire on the Sovereign's command center. The rest of the fleet is secondary." As the countdown to battle began, Matthews felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It had been a long journey, but humanity had earned its place among the stars. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for their future, for the galaxy, and for the very idea that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. 3, 2, 1. Mark. The fleet of human ships surged forward in perfect synchrony, firing a barrage of missiles and energy blasts toward the heart of the Vornax fleet. The first salvo hit the Vornax shields with a resounding explosion, sending shockwaves through the darkness. The Vornax flagship, the Sovereign, shuddered under the impact, but its defenses held firm. However, it was clear that the Vornax were not prepared for the precision of the human strike. Their fleet was sprawling, disorganized as they scrambled to respond to the sudden onslaught. "Direct hit on their shields," shouted Lieutenant Morgan from the tactical station. "Shields are weakening. Their central core is exposed." Matthews barely heard the report. His eyes were fixed on the battle unfolding outside, calculating their next move. The Vornax were strong, but the Indomitable was faster, and its weapons more advanced. The human fleet cut through the chaos, carving their way toward the Sovereign, delivering wave after wave of concentrated fire. "Keep pressing the attack," Matthews barked. "Target their engines, disable their ability to retreat." The Indomitable and the other human ships fired relentlessly. With every shot, the Vornax flagship's shields flickered, then collapsed entirely. Matthews could see the Vornax commander, Rix, through the feed, the image of fury on his face as he ordered his remaining ships to charge. But it was too late. The humans were already in position. "Now," Matthews shouted, "focus fire on the command center." A devastating volley of energy blasts erupted from the Indomitable and the Allied ships, tearing through the already weakened defenses of the Sovereign. A massive explosion erupted from the Vornax flagship's core. The shockwave rippled outward, and for a moment, the entire battlefield seemed to pause in the silence that followed. The Vornax flagship was crippled, its power core detonating in a burst of radiant energy. The remaining Vornax ships faltered, momentarily disoriented by the loss of their command center. The battle was turning. "They're in retreat," Hayes exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. "The fleet is breaking formation. They're pulling back." Matthews allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had done it. The Vornax, those relentless invaders, had been broken. The human fleet was victorious. But Matthews wasn't naive. The Vornax wouldn't forget this. They would regroup. They would find a way to strike back. This was just one battle, but it was a crucial one. And in that moment, Matthews knew that humanity had made a statement, a bold declaration to the universe. Humanity was not to be underestimated. "Secure the perimeter," Matthews said, his voice quiet but steady. "We've won this battle, but we've just begun the war. Make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." As the Vornax ships fled, limping away from the battlefield, the Indomitable and the human fleet remained poised, resolute. The galaxy had seen humanity fight with everything it had, and though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity was here to stay.